I want to start there by raising some questions for you. So listen to this. We're not used to listening to poetry, but just listen. Sometimes, if you walk carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories, who could cross a shimmering bed of dry leaves without a sound, you come to a place whose only purpose is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests. Coming from nowhere, but in this place leading everywhere. Requests to stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have waited patiently for you. Questions that have no right to go away. That's a poem by a friend of mine named David White. Anyone read his poems? One or two. Dave's awesome. Please get his poetry and read it. It'll change your life. I'm just here to raise some questions. And I love my place in the program with you because I think the flow, the logic of this conversation you're calling a conference makes a lot of sense to me. Mark Milliron laid out what we're really grasping and reaching toward, the difference we want to make in the world. And this morning, the first step towards that difference is to make sure that the people who need what we have to provide for them have access to it. Real access, genuine access, the kind that makes a difference. And they asked me to talk about excellence. And then later, there'll be a conversation about the ultimate for the students, their completion of their dream. So I'm to talk about excellence. And I have a certain way of coming at this because I can't tell you the answers you're after exactly. I can raise a few questions for you. So here's the first question. There are three characters in every scene that we watched in all those films. Who are they? Students, teachers, and the institution. The overlooked character in every one of those film clips, and in most of our work, is the institution itself. If you go looking for people writing and speaking and so on about excellence, it's usually very personal. It's about personal excellence, individual excellence. Once in a while, about team excellence, usually with a sports metaphor. What I want to talk to you about, the questions I want to raise, are about our collective excellence, what we're able to achieve together that's meant to be the sum that's much greater than our parts. I want to talk about that. So here's my first slide for you. I have slides. I don't always have slides. In order to have a definition of excellence for your college, you have to have a definition of the college. What is the college? At the end of the day, what is the college? It's not as easy to answer as it sounds like, but a touchstone, really a cornerstone in the work at Valencia for more than a decade has been this definition of our work. You may think the college is its programs and its mission. You may think the college is its staff and faculty. You may think the college is its campuses and buildings. You might even be one of those people who thinks the college is its enrollment or its FTE or its budget or something else. But the only useful definition of the college is this. The college is whatever the students experience, period. It's their experience. It's how they experience us that counts, not how we experience them. The problem is they come and go with such frequency that it's very easy to lose touch with their experience and focus on ours. Of all the institutions made by man, hardly any is as self-absorbed as a university or a college. It's true. You know it's true. You experienced it as a student. I love working in community colleges. I stumbled in. I didn't plan it. I didn't have any plan. Certainly didn't want to have a job. I was going to make music and write poems, and someone was going to take care of me. It was going to be great. And my wife, Jane's father, Bob, said, you're not marrying her without a job. And I said, well, I've got a job. He said, what is it? I said, poet. I got an icy stare. I stumbled into the work in community college. I'm forever grateful because this is the sector in higher education that's still deeply in touch with its servant ethic. It's still possible not to be completely self-absorbed in our sector, isn't it? I'm not sure about all the others. I think they're exemplars, they're outliers. But on the whole, if you've got an 800-year history, it's easy to think it's all about you. It's not. Never has been. The college is what the students experience. And in all of our habits, we're already developing a perspective that it's about how we experience them, not about how they experience us. It's very hard to avoid. It's the way we talk about them. It's the way we group them and think of them as a herd. It's the way that we process, fold, and mutilate, and spindle. All those things, in the end, turn students into numbers, into equivalent units of consumption, into FTE. And at some point, they understand that's what they are to us. Our whole culture has taught a generation now that their really deep value to us is in the magnetic strip on the back of that little card. They're FTE. I gave this talk, or one like it, in Canada. A guy approached me afterwards and says, thanks for that, but it's really worse here. I said, why? He says, because we don't measure them in FTEs. We measure them in what we call funding units, or FUs. Wow. Could it be more clear? But there are 1,000 ways that we're already developing the habit of thinking the college is how we experience them. For example, one of the most common variables that people use to talk about our work, that we talk shop, the unit of analysis is the section. Section's a very important unit of analysis in our work, isn't it? Average section size, sections taught by adjuncts versus full-time faculty, etc. Section completion rates and section failure rates, all that sort of stuff. That's how we experience them. That's not how they experience us. Here's a really ordinary example. In most colleges, the success rate in front door courses, most community colleges, hovers somewhere around 50 to 55%. Those are first experience courses. 2/3 of them developmental, okay, across the country. You probably do better than that. But around the country, it's around 50 to 55%. That's the percentage that started it and finished it and had an A or a B or a C. They didn't make an F. They didn't make a W, which is the most common grade in those classes. And they didn't make an I, which is just a pregnant F. They made an A or B or C. Okay? Now, early in our work at Valencia, we discovered a really helpful thing. We discovered, just by torturing the data in conversation, that the best predictor of graduation at our college was success on first attempt on your first 5 courses. Doesn't matter what the courses are. College level or developmental, didn't matter. Didn't matter whether you took them all in one semester or over 2 semesters or over 3 semesters or over 5 semesters. If you had success on your first attempt on your first 5 courses, your likelihood of graduating was extraordinarily high. So we used to do this mental math. This is what we call drinking the draft of despair. We did this mental math. We said, okay, if the probability of success in one section is about 0.5, then what would be the probability if they were independent events, which they're not, but if they were, it's a thought experiment. What's the probability of success in 5 classes if the independent probability is 0.5 for each one? Well, you multiply probabilities, don't you? So it's 0.5 to the fifth, which in percentages is 3.1%. In our thought experiment, the probability of a student falling into that highly likely to graduate is 3%. That's despair. No wonder nobody graduates. Here's the whole country waking up and saying, look at these amazing things we created. There are 1,200 community colleges that could change the world if only anyone graduated. That's the conversation nationally right now. I'm in it all the time. It's really hopeful because I know and you know that the results we have gotten don't have to be the results we get. In our thought experiment at Valencia again, this was early in our conversations, 12, 13 years ago, we did this and everybody got sad. And I said, what if we did everything right? We focused every discretionary resource on the front door. We call it Start Right at our place. Lots of learning support, really proper assessment and placement. Just wrap the students in the best pedagogy with the best faculty. Everything we knew how to do. How high could we get that success rate in those sections? Could we get it to 1, 1.0, 100%? No. Life happens. We said, what if we could get it to the success rate of the downstream courses, which is about 80%? What does that do to that calculation? Again, a thought experiment. Well, then the probability of success on your first 5 would be 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8. Anybody know what that is off the top of your head? It's about 32%. It's close. It's about 32%. A tenfold improvement in our calculation of your likelihood of graduating. Anybody interested in a tenfold improvement in graduation rates? I am. Now, this is a thought experiment. This was to engage the conversation. Turns out you can get the data. And of course, these are not statistically independent events. A student who withdraws is much more likely to withdraw again. And if you withdraw twice, your likelihood of withdrawing on a third time goes way up. In other words, our withdrawal policies and the way we've handled them over the years have raised a generation of quitters, and it is habit forming. Really worth re-examining. Gets hard? Quit. Think you might make a C? We had a big bunch of students protecting their GPAs. We called them serial withdrawers. And half of those who withdrew and withdrew and withdrew at extraordinary numbers were protecting a high GPA because in their head that was the most important thing. And we'd sit them down and say, don't you think somebody is going to look at your record and see 41 withdrawals and wonder if you're not right? Okay. Here's what the data really look like. These data say, these are first time in college students. We do lots of cohort work. First time in college students. These are the percentages who complete all 5. That's 47, a little less than half of them, do complete their first 5 courses on their first attempt. That number's way up from 10 years ago because we've been concentrating on it, but it's still less than half. And then about a fourth withdraw or fail in one of those 5 classes, and about 16% withdraw or fail in 2 of them, and about 12% less than that. Okay? So what happens to them? Does it have an impact? Well, yeah. Here's the actual calculus. This is fall to fall persistence. Most people calculate fall to spring. We often look at fall to fall. These are mostly part-time students, and it takes them a while to graduate. If you just measure fall to spring, I'm not sure you're learning everything you need to learn. So we also measure fall to fall and fall to 18-month out spring, all those retention rates. I like to call them persistence rates too, because it puts the agency more on the student than the institution. Persistence is something they do with our help. Retention is something we do. So we like to call it persistence. Okay? So what does it do? This is fall to fall persistence is almost 88%. Does that sound encouraging? That sounds like somebody who's got academic momentum who just might graduate. Remember, this is all FTICs, including those in developmental, including those deeply in developmental. Okay? 4 or 5, it drops off a little bit. 3 or 5, it drops off again. And then if you complete less than 3 successfully, it drops way off. But even this understates the long-term impact. This is graduation with a degree. We use a 5-year rate for this measure because it fits our students better. What we found is that the graduation rate goes up pretty dramatically all the way through the 5th year, and then that curve starts to plateau a bit. It still goes up, but not a lot after the 5th year. So we measure there more often than the 3rd or the 4th. So we think it fits our students. But if you succeed in all 5 on first attempt, let me say it again, on first attempt, you have nearly a 60% probability of graduating at Valencia. That's huge, isn't it? That would change everything. That would change everything. If you withdraw or fail in just one, it drops from 60 to 36. And 2, it drops to 20. If you drop or fail in 3 of your first 5, you have essentially no chance of graduating. 6%. That's just error in the system. Isn't that stunning? So, where are you going to put your resources? Where are you going to influence students' trajectory through their academic career? Are you going to put all that emphasis on capstone experiences? Advanced courses in the 4th year? No, it's all at the front door. Our working theory for years has been, if we can get them successful at the beginning, that is, if we can equip them with the behaviors and the confidence comes from actually succeeding, not from being told someday you will. If we can get them confident and their behaviors oriented towards success early, that cascades into the rest of their program and leads to success. And that's what this data say. Impressive, huh? I love these numbers. So now we have a definition of institution. Let me point out again, if you look at that from the way we experience them, you can look at a 50% success rate in a section and say, that's not so bad. Oh, they'll get it on the next attempt if they didn't get it this time. If I batted 500 in the National League, I'm headed to the Hall of Fame. You can make those rationalizations if your unit of analysis is the section, because you experience sections. The students experience personal failure or personal success, not a section rate. And those data make clearly that batting 500 is a disaster for them. With me? Okay. So now we need a definition of excellence. And it has to be, as I think your previous speaker said, learner-centered now. So the second piece of our working theory is the reason people don't complete, the main reason, by far the most important reason why people don't complete is because they don't learn. It's because they don't learn. All the child care in the world doesn't fix that. All the financial aid in the world doesn't fix that. All the transportation in the world doesn't fix that. You can teach your heart out. They don't learn, they don't complete. The only way to move the completion numbers is to move the learning numbers. Students have to learn. We know this. Many of you teach in technical programs that have known this for years, where your graduation rates are very high because you're really clear about what they have to learn. And you teach for learning, not for something else. You know this. So here's my definition of excellence. Use it or not. We will experience excellence as organizations in our collective effort, in our shared mission, when we provide powerful, coherent, personal learning experiences to our students that leads to the completion of their goals, the expansion of their opportunities beyond what their first goals might have been, and greater contribution to the community through their work and their family and their life. There's a definition, start on, at least on a definition of excellence. But the pieces matter. Powerful learning experiences, coherent learning experiences, personal learning experiences. This can be done, but it's hard, isn't it? Do you know why it's so hard? Because this isn't what we were designed to do. We were not designed to do this. Our deep design, our deep architecture, our DNA was not designed to do this. That's why it's so hard. Why? Well, instead of being designed for powerful learning experiences, we were designed for efficient teaching. Efficiency is a really key word here. To teach and to teach and to teach and to teach until you, by God, can't teach anymore, to quote Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Remember that line? Instead of coherent learning, we were designed to deliver these portable, reproducible, transportable units of credit that move anywhere, anytime, in any direction, and are all the same. That's not a coherent program of learning, is it? And so your universities are very happy to take your transfer students when they take them with a handful of these credits. And we say, well, why don't you require them to get the degree first? And the answer is, what difference does it make? If it's not a coherent program of learning, what difference does it make? Take whatever credit they have. And we were not designed to deliver deeply personal learning experiences. We were designed around what the Europeans call the massification of higher education. We can color that. We can put a spin on that that's pretty positive, and I like to. This is the great experiment that anyone can learn. That's the positive side of that. The negative side is we were designed for a mass experience, not a personal experience. Why? Anybody know the answer? Why were we designed this way? The answer is when we were designed. The presenting issues when community colleges were created was post-World War II America. And we had two experiences that the rest of the world didn't have following World War II. The first was our boys came back. Nobody else's did. There were 50 million casualties, military casualties, in World War II. America had 300,000. Our boys came back. Russia had 22 million. Germany had 11 million. France had 4 million. Run the numbers. In Europe, an entire generation, for the second time in a century, was wiped out. But our boys came back. And they came back to an industry base that was entirely committed to the war effort that now had ended. And so they came back to a deep recession and dislocation of jobs and lots of social unrest because they couldn't be absorbed back into the economy. There were food riots in Washington. It was a scary time. What do you do with these millions of guys who now have guns and all sorts of other habits? And so the Veterans Readjustment Act, we call it the GI Bill, was passed. And it had a lot of things in it to readjust. The VA hospital system grew by leaps and bounds. It was important to do that. The Veterans Home Administration, to give these guys guaranteed, underwritten, low-interest loans so they could get a little piece of America, their own home, right? And oh, by the way, about 18% of the adult population chooses to pursue some college after high school. We'll give them a scholarship for that, but probably most of them won't want it. Big surprise, huh? So there was this rush to go to college and no capacity. And so we had to change. We had to adopt and adapt. And women's colleges became co-ed, and teachers' colleges became regional universities. Can you name one? East Carolina. Yeah, great example. We had to scale, we had to create capacity because of this demand. But we hadn't seen anything yet. In 1949, President Truman, worried about all these issues, created a commission. We call it the Truman Commission. How many of you know what the Truman Commission was? Raise your hand. Oh, people, this is your story. This is your story. The Truman Commission was designed to solve the problem I just described. And their solution was this. We're going to take the traditional, now fairly long existing, several decades, junior college, and we're going to marry it to the relatively new animal called an industrial education center. So you have both practical arts and liberal arts taught in one institution. And there will be one located within commuting distance of 90% of the population. There'll be commuter colleges, and they'll be open door. And we'll call them comprehensive community colleges. That's where the idea came from. The Truman Commission. And immediately, all the rest of higher education sprang into action to prevent it from occurring. Because we don't like change, and we don't really need those, and they're not really college material, and they might take my enrollment, and so on and so on. Lots of opposition, particularly that time from independent higher education, because they had a much bigger market share then than they do now, and they rightly understood that this would change their lives forever, because nobody's going to spend what in today's money would be $40,000 a year to become an elementary school teacher, unless they had to. Now there's going to be another model. Then, a little later after the war, to be precise, 18 years, 9 months, and 15 minutes after the war, the second huge thing happened, called the baby boom. The baby boom. Let me just run that joke by you again. 18 minutes, 18 years, sorry, 9 months and 15 minutes. Okay. Baby boom. And so all that issue of demand capacity was put on steroids, and we had to create institutions. And when we went to create them, we went to, you know, who is it, Maslow, that said when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail? What was America's best tool in World War II and beyond? Industrial productivity. That was our contribution to the European war effort. Industrial productivity. It worked. There's an American model of the factory, by the way, which doesn't like the later Japanese model. And you know how it works. You take raw material like students, you put them in one end of the factory, and they go down an assembly line, one step at a time. And each person does one thing to them, worth about 3 credit hours. Down the line they go. And if they make it all the way through, boom, they're a product, and you send them out into the world. And in the American model, if they're not a product, if they don't make it, they're called scrap. 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 That's how we were designed. Nobody was thoughtless and awful doing that. That's the tool we had. And the deep architecture of our institutions is still really colored by those early days. For example, there were no adjunct faculty before World War II. They were invented for the factory model. They're called hourly labor. In the universities, there were no giant lecture halls. I work at Oxford every year. There are lecture halls at Oxford. They're owned by the Oxford Union, not the university. And there are lectures down there. They don't count for credit. They're not part of anybody's course. They're a public service. The education at Oxford occurs in the professor's chambers with 2 or 3 or 4 students. The lecture hall was an invention of the factory model because the highest values in the factory are volume and productivity. Volume and productivity are everything. Let's be as big as we can so we can produce as much as we can And let's measure everything. And again, in the American model of productivity, the measure of productivity wasn't cost per product. It was cost per unit, whether the unit made it to the end of the line or not. Like cost per FTE. Now, there may be things in your college that make you crazy. Your president didn't design them. He didn't put in place, or she didn't put in place, the funding model, the deep logic of the funding model, which is volumetric. Reward volume, not value. Reward volume. The staffing model, we didn't invent it. We've been given it just like you have. And it's got to change. So here's our challenge. If we're going to be excellent, can we, in the middle of the factory, while it's in full production, can we redesign it into something entirely different, with a different set of values? Something that values learning first, that understands that enrollment, that volume, is a part of our lives. It's a necessary thing, but it's a means to an end, not an end of in itself. Learning is the end, not enrollment. And can we deliver learning experiences that are powerful and coherent and personal by doing that deep work? And that's what we've been about for more than a decade. And I want to tell you, I'm more hopeful than at any time in my professional life because it works. It changes the results. Let me just show you one graph. You won't be able to read that. I'm going to tell you what it means. You see where the graph starts turning north there, particularly the blue one? That's about 5 years ago. Now, the first 5 years on that graph, where it's fairly flat, Valencia was the second largest producer of graduates in the country. We were already at the pinnacle. We're nowhere near, we're not even in the top 10 in size. We're probably 20th or something, 25th, I don't know. But we were number 2 in the awarding of degrees. Right? And working hard. And then about the middle of that graph is when our conversation started leading to really dramatic change in the organization, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And that's where the graph starts to go up. That's also where enrollment went up, because that's the beginning of the recession. And our enrollment grew during those 5 years about 40%. Does that sound familiar? Did yours do that too? Lots of folks did. Now, when enrollment goes up, you expect degree production and certificate production to go up, don't you? But not as fast as enrollment. There's a lag time, isn't there? Because people have to finish the program they start. So, growing 40% over that time period, I expected our degree production and our certificate production to go up maybe 20%. Instead, the red down there is Associate of Science and Associate of Applied Science. It went up 60% during the same 5 years. We grew 40%. Okay? Certificates went up, that's the yellow-greenish line, went up 60% during the same 5 years. The college grew 40%. And Associate of Arts degrees went up 97% over 5 years, when enrollment went up 40%. And we reduced our cost per full-time student by 25% during the same time. Cost per student. That is, we took budget cuts. We didn't set out to reduce our costs. We had to. We got those results while the budget was being cut. And the curve is still going up. You see why I'm so hopeful? I didn't know if this was right or not. The theory we had is if we can improve learning, graduations will increase. But I wasn't sure. It looks like it's right. Anybody interested in a 97% increase in over 5 years in your credentials? Would that be a good thing? Wouldn't the learning that contributes to that be a good thing? You see, the completion agenda, which is somebody else's topic, I know, the completion agenda has the theory backwards. The completion agenda says if more people completed, then they will have learned more, and that's a good thing. And our theory is if more people learn, then they're going to complete, and that's a good thing. And it makes all the difference in terms of what you work on. So let me show you what we worked on quickly. We had to change our culture. What do you change to get those kind of results? Everything. Everything. The whole culture has to change. The way we think has to change. And we change by changing our conversation first. And these 4 points here are the points I want to share with you before I finish. Okay? First, I know a whole bunch of you have heard me say this before. I'm still saying it. It's the core issue. The principle is this. For years, our enterprise at every level, university, college, has believed learning is for some. Wrong. It's not right. It's the wrong theory. The evidence is, unless you are damaged, and a tiny fraction of a percent are damaged, and even they might surprise you. Unless you're damaged, you have, everyone in this room has all the equipment, the biological equipment, to learn everything we have to teach. You've got it. Some will be slower, some will be faster, though over time those differences converge. The slower ones begin to pick up speed with successful learning experiences. You all have the biology for this, and I could prove it to you. I mean, I could show you the 70 or 80 slides I used to show to try to prove this to people. It's real. This is the truth. You believe it? Anyone can learn anything under the right conditions. You believe it? No, you don't. You're liars. Half the people in this room believe that you are math disabled. You do. You know who you are. I'm not good at math. Where's a math teacher? Raise your hand, math teacher. What percentage of your students come in and tell you, I'm no good at math? 90%. They're just like us. Scary, isn't it? It's not true. Every one of those students has the biology necessary to learn calculus. Now, I could prove it to you, and I've proven it to others, but I don't have to, because the story is convincing enough. I gave that speech, that particular speech in Texas, 15 years ago now. Death by PowerPoint. At the end, a school teacher came up to me and said, thank you, Dr. Shugart, for that speech. Sign my program, blah, blah, blah. She says, and I really like that thing you said about anybody can learn anything under the right conditions. And I think it's true in most disciplines. I said, well, what is it you teach? And she said, I teach German. It's a very hard language. It's kind of non-intuitive, and the grammar's difficult, and the vocabulary just has these words stuck together. And sometimes a word at the end of a sentence will change the meaning of a word earlier in the sentence. And it's just a hard language. And I can tell you, after teaching German for 15 years, there are some people who just can't learn German. I said, oh, how fortunate for them. They weren't born in Germany. Let that sink in. You see, pretty much 100% of the people born in Germany master German. You think that's genetic? There's a Deutsche gene or something? No. It just happens that the conditions for learning German are extraordinarily good in Germany. And if I took any of you and dropped you in Kitzbühel, Austria, with 100 euros and said, you're on your own, I'll be back in 6 weeks. When I came back, you'd be speaking German. You understand? It's about conditions. It's about this changed everything for us. Because now the whole teaching and learning community is talking about what are the best conditions for the learner. How do we know them? They control so many of them themselves. How do we partner with them so that they create better conditions for their own learning? What are the best conditions? How do we know that? What evidence do we have? That's a very different conversation than, well, some people just aren't college material. Or the more sophisticated version of that, which is, we're dealing with underprepared students. Okay? Our culture changed, and we said, yes, everyone comes to us with various levels of preparation. But every one of them is capable of learning under the right conditions. Let's get it as right as we can. And that led to really interesting conversations, like, what are the 10 boneheadedest things we do that we know are bad for learning, but we do it to all our students all the time? You could name them, couldn't you? Really stupid things we do for enrollment, usually, or we think that's what they're for, that are really bad. Like, we know this skill is prerequisite to that one, but we're not going to require it or assess it. Like, we know it's important to be there the first day of class if learning's going to occur the first day of class, but we're going to let you come in the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth, sometimes the sixth. We call that access. I call that a lie. That's cheating the students. They're not going to learn, and the faculty are taught not to teach. Just hand out the syllabus and send them home. God knows who'll be here next week. Call that late registration and drop ad. All those things changed. Have they changed at your place too? A lot of places have done this. At Valencia, you can't add a class once it's met, period. When it's met, it's closed. So now I could reasonably go to rational faculty and say, could you make the first minute of the first meeting of the first class a learning minute? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. See, the factory has a hard time with that because the factory's in full production, and the fear, we all feel it. I'm a president, I feel it. What happens to our enrollment? That affects our money. I'll look ineffective, the board will wonder. I won't be able to give you the raise you're demanding. All that stuff's going on inside the factory. Okay? And you just have to have the courage to go face it down and say, okay, this may temporarily affect our enrollment. Guess what? It did for one semester, and the students figured it out. Oh, I'm supposed to be there first day. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Let's go back to the slides. So if you get to focus on conditions of learning, this is a very different conversation. And it leads to all sorts of behaviors, systemic and individual, that change the learning environment for the students. Now, I can tell you what those are. It doesn't matter. You can figure them out. What you have to know is you have to be in the right conversation. Then you'll figure them out. Evidence-based practice. I bet Mark talked about this. He's the guru of evidence, among others. Here's what it means. Okay? Faculty, you got to clap on that last one, didn't you? Okay, I'm going to step on your toes now. Evidence-based practice means you don't live in a private world anymore. Sorry. Here's where you're going to be. I promise you this is where you will be. You can make it happen and shape it, or you can fight it and go kicking and screaming. But before I retire, and that's not very far off, your student assessments of your instruction, your grade distributions, and the progress your students make in subsequent courses will all be up on the web for everyone to see. You're going to practice in public with data that's shared in public and learn to make that a productive thing. You're going to start looking at your results versus your colleagues and say, how is he getting these better results? And instead of having the private conversation back in the mailroom, his standards are low, you're going to have a real professional dialogue. What are you doing differently than I am? What can I learn from you? It's going to happen. And it's going to happen across institutions and across departments and across individual faculty. It's vital, and it has to happen. But even more important than that, which is having the data to make better decisions and test your decisions, even more important. Oh, by the way, what I just described to you, that public practice, occurs in Texas by law. It's a law in Texas. And it has to be accessible on an individual faculty member within 3 clicks from the front page of the website of the institution. Isn't that interesting? I'm really curious to see if it changed anything. The theory behind that is that transparency and student choice will change faculty behavior. I'm not sure whether that's true or not, because I think the underlying message in that is the faculty are the problem. And see, I think that's the wrong theory. The right theory is the faculty are the solution. And most of them will embrace public practice because they want the students to do better and they want to improve their practice, no matter how good they are. I think the faculty are the solution. That's why we need to equip you for evidence-based practice. You need a dashboard. The faculty are the last ones to get a dashboard. CFO's got a dashboard, president's got a dashboard, board members got all the big muckety-mucks got dashboards. Who's providing you with really useful information for changing your practice in real time? That's the dashboard we need, a learner-centered dashboard. Evidence is going to be huge. More important than evidence is how you approach the conversation. You know what kills us? You know what just kills colleges? Advocacy. The habit of advocacy. I come to every meeting representing an interest group. We know what we think, and we're right. Our job is to persuade you that you're wrong. We know we won't because we've been having this conversation for 31 years. We even sit at the same place at the table every time we have it. Nothing changes. Advocacy is a disaster for us. We, of all people, should be committed to an attitude of inquiry. It's having good questions that counts. If somebody has an idea, the response to it ought to be, well, let me show you the 9 ways that won't work. It ought to be, well, let's look closer. What evidence do we have? What do the data tell us? How could we test that? Why do you think it means that? Is there an alternative to that in the room? We need to be retrained in habits of engagement with each other. We need to be purged of the committee. We need new models of collaborative conversation. And we've had to invent them at Valencia. We have lots of them. We have new spaces for them because the conversation had to change. You want to change your culture? Change your conversation. And evidence is a big piece of that. Redesign everything around learning. Use learning as your principle of design. That's where we ask those questions, the 10 dumbest things we do. We took, at scale, our model of recruiting, assessing, inducting students into the organization and their first experiences and said, all that's got to change. Designed it from scratch. What would be learning centered in that? Why? Read all the literature. Hundreds of people involved in this redesign. We call it Life Map. It's not perfect, but it's an intentional model of student engagement that brings them through the front door and launches them towards their degree or their certificate. Intentional. Not put together because this is the way financial aid works and this is the way admission works and federal guidelines say you have to do that. One full design, end to end, that made sense. Did the same thing for the way that we identify, recruit, hire, and induct faculty into professional practice at the college. Maybe the most important thing we've done in terms of changing our culture. Huge. The faculty have such high standards for one another, and they're so committed to one another. That induction process is better than any master's degree I ever saw. It's awesome. Competency-based, individualized, personal, coherent, and powerful. That's how we expect the faculty to learn. Why wouldn't we? That's how we expect the students to learn. Everything's at scale. If you're doing little projects, mini grants, just stop. Just stop doing mini grants are a waste of time. Unless you have a specific model for scaling it when it works. Do you? Let's suppose you do, let's say, a pilot project in supplemental instruction, which we do a lot of. It really works. But you need to prove it at your place. So you do supplemental instruction. And suppose you show significant advances in student learning by using a supplemental instruction model. Then what? Do you know going in what happens next? We need a discipline of innovation to scale so that before the pilot starts, we've decided what happens at each stage of the scaling and how we'll know it's worth investing in and how we'll get everyone involved on the front end So it's a collaborative project, and you have a theory of adoption that works. Instead, what we have is that's his pet project, and that's his pet project, and that's her pet project. And don't worry, she'll get tired later and do something else. And then we won't have to change. You got to go in planning to. Lastly, make it personal. I talked a little bit about students not being numbers. Do you know how many ways we tell them they're a number? Think about it. Student walks in. Who's here from Student Affairs? Okay, I'm going to hurt you. I love you. I'm going to hurt you. Student walks in to the factory. The factory thinks it's really modern now because it's got a food court. Admissions, counseling, advising, financial aid, veterans, all in one building. You can see it all from one place. We got a food court. Okay? So a student walks in line. Do they know which line to go to? Probably not. As they approach, they're herded through a little cattle thing. It was invented at Walt Disney World, so I know a lot about it. It goes back and forth, and you walk through it even if there's nobody else in line. You walk up and down, and you think, I'm feeling kind of stupid doing this, but I guess. And you get to the front, and you're on this side of the counter, the great unwashed. They're on the other side of the counter, the anointed. You stand, they sit. And how do they approach you to serve you? What do they say? Say it out loud. Next. So you walk up. They're looking down, maybe looking at the screen. You'd like to look at that screen, but you can't look at that screen because you got to look at the wires coming out of the back of that screen. That's the only part of the screen you get to look at. And they say, what do you want? How can I help you? Well, I need a transcript. What's your number? Have they asked you your name yet? No. What's your number? They go, they put the number in. Up comes on. They say on your data. Okay, you want a transcript. You know, you can print that at home now. If you want another one, I'm going to have to charge you for it. And you print them a transcript. Now, it turns out the student never needed a transcript. They just thought they needed a transcript. But if you'd asked them, well, why do you think you need a transcript? They'd have told you why. And you just said, oh, no, you don't need a transcript for that. We send the transcripts automatically to financial aid. You don't have to carry one over there and stand in another line and look at the back of another computer to do this. Over and over and over again, we tell them, you're just a number. I don't have time to show it to you today. This happens in the classroom too. Our powerful faculty know if they make a connection in the first week, they've got a connection for a semester. If they keep their distance that first week, they can never close the distance. They know this. The research says that this is research, students form their impression of the faculty member in the first 15 minutes. And the most important part of the impression that they form is this question: why is she here? For me or for something else? And once that impression's formed, they're done. It doesn't change. Boy, those first experiences are huge. Just huge. There's a scene at the end of Paper Chase, the one with Professor Kingsfield. You come in here with a skull full of mush, that guy. Do you remember who the main character in Paper Chase was? The law student with all the hair that they flashed to? Jonathan Hart. Jonathan Hart. Professor Kingsfield and Jonathan Hart. Jonathan Hart loved Professor Kingsfield, wanted to be like him, broke into the library to read his personal papers, had some shenanigans with his daughter. Loved him. The very end of the movie, they're in the elevator. And Hart stands at the back of the elevator. In comes Professor Kingsfield with his papers, turns his back to him and says, Professor Kingsfield, Yes. I just wanted to let you know I really, really enjoyed your course. Thank you. No, I mean, it meant something to me. Your course really, really meant something to me. Kingsfield turns around and pulls his glasses off and looks at him for a second and says, and you are? And he says, Hart. Thank you, Mr. Hart, and leaves. It's personal. It's personal. Our systems have to be person-centered. That's huge. You have to redesign them so that at every level, the student is honored as a person and treated as a person. I could talk an hour just on that. It's huge. What does the mail look like that they get? What do the email messages look like? Do they tell them, you're special, you're a person, you're unique? The only adequate definition of authentic human service is to render a unique response to the unique human being in front of you. Our great faculty do that every day. I'm amazed at how they do it with 25 people in the room. They're giving 25 unique relationships focused on learning. And our challenge, gang, at my place is to render a personal response to 70,000 persons a year. It's a huge challenge. Let me say, too, one more thing about personal. Several years ago, we went to NYSOD, and they invited us to bring a student. It's because we were an Achieving the Dream college. So we brought a student. There were 6 students, and they told us, bring a student who succeeded against the odds. So we brought one, Teresa. Teresa was a typical community college student. She was 32, wanted to be a school teacher, and she became a grandmother while we were in Austin. Doing her life in a different order than I did mine. But bright, capable, she's now a school teacher. She was on the panel. 4 or 5 other panelists. 250 administrators and faculty in the room listening with bated breath as Vincent Tinto interviewed these students in front of us about their college, their experience of college. At the end he said, if you had to name just one thing, one program, one thing that made the difference for you succeeding against the odds, what would that be? What's the one thing? None of them said, we got great technology at my college. We have a super strategic plan. And our finances, you should see our fund balance. They didn't even say we have a great tutoring program or a great curriculum. They didn't even say the faculty are awesome. Every one of them answered it the same way. They named a person. One person. Ours named some lady I didn't know. The Latina name. Maria, we'll call her. Maria made the difference for me. And Vince said, well, who is Maria? And she said, well, she got me through algebra. Was she a professor? No, wasn't a professor. Well, was she a tutor? I don't know. Well, where did she work? In that big building they used to call a library. She would meet me there whenever I needed her to. She was pretty flexible, and she got me through algebra. Maria got me through. Maria. One person. Think about that. You may be somebody's best connection. You may be somebody's only connection. It's a person over there, not a problem. One more slide, and I'll wrap. I want to tell you that the numbers are changing. The outcomes are changing. There are a lot of folks still who are thinking about throwing in the towel on our institutions, you know. Maybe we need a disruptive innovation outside of our institutions. Well, there are 8 million students in our institutions, and we need innovation inside them. But the innovation we need aren't tricks or tools. We have to change the way we think first, and then we have to change the deep culture of the organization together, collaboratively, in mutual support. Excellence is a team sport for us. No more advocacy, inquiry, hard questions, good data, and 1,000 little things changing that never made it to the strategic plan. They're the choices made of people who choose to operate in a different culture, a learning-centered culture. And nobody is as lucky as we are to get to work in that culture. So let me read a little short poem called Lucky. This is a music metaphor because that's who I am. Lucky. There are times I need to pinch myself to prove this isn't just a dream, this work that reaches right down through the rich loam of rhythm and harmony to the roots of joy and shakes the whole tree of my existence with laughter and apprehension that no matter how hard we play, this can't last. Of course, there are times when it feels like going through the motions, not that we're phoning it in, but there just isn't anything happening. The notes are all there in the right combinations, the right order, but there's no connection, no groove, no conversation, no jazz. But if I keep playing, keep trusting, even a hollow performance eventually serves only to intensify the real music when it happens. And it will happen. When the planets align or the gods condescend or fundamental particles resonate with the wave of creation, which is to say, it feels, I feel, so incredibly lucky to be here in the endlessly unfolding work. So lucky not to be going through the motions of all the other jobs and careers and options to which I might have been resigned. So lucky to be here with you who also know the rush when it all comes together. And so lucky to have learned. The more I practice, the luckier I get. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Sandy. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now having a beverage break down in the vendor area, and I hope you enjoy your afternoon breakout sessions.